A phrase that we've heard a lot this year is coronavirus is a marathon, not a sprint. And I got to hear a radio program recently with a veteran marathon runner. And he talked about how it is like a marathon and how it's not like a marathon in other ways. He said, the thing about a marathon is that it's really hard and it's really long, but you know exactly how long it is, 26.2 miles. And so when you're around mile 16, you start to say, okay, this is really hard, but I know exactly how long I've got between now and the end. And he said, if that were to be taken away, if instead of saying we're going to run 26.2 miles, you were just told, just keep running until I tell you to stop, it would be so much harder. And he taught me a phrase that I loved. It's called teleoanticipation. It's the way a person judges how far they are from their edge by how close they are to the end. And that's what has been missing for us. We are struggling because we don't have a relationship to the end of the race yet. Do you remember when we were told in March, you know what, let's just take 2 weeks, let's flatten this curve, let's break this circuit, and we'll be good. But obviously, that's not a skill that is going to come easily for us, but it's one that we really need to grow in. I remember that there was a point, maybe at the end of March, early April, where someone said, do you suppose we might have to cancel our trip to Italy to see Matt Duclos be ordained a deacon? And I said, no, that's not till October. Surely we'll be in a different place by then. But, you know, there is that skill that Jesus is encouraging us to have. Can you keep going, even if you don't know when it'll end, based purely on your trust in me? A lot of you have had the experience of being challenged by loved ones to stay up late for New Year's Eve each year. I know that I always am goading my parents, come on, let's just stay up until midnight. And most years they don't make it. Although I've heard a lot of people say, this year I'm going to make it because I want to make sure that 2020 is gone. But you know, that's one of those things. If it's just one night, you could do it. You could say, all right, you know what? I'm going to either take a nap or I'm going to have a cup of coffee before dinner, and then I will make it till midnight. But if somebody just said, stay awake until I tell you to go to sleep, ooh. And that's what we're hearing in the readings today. Stay awake. Stay alert. Don't let yourself get drowsy. You have no idea when you're going to be needed. So stay awake. Keep alert. I think that one of the things that Jesus is encouraging us to consider is how you feel differently after a 20-minute nap than you do after an hour and a half long nap. Have you ever taken a nap that was too long, longer than you expected to be asleep, and then had that feeling of, where am I? And what day is it? Completely disoriented. And I don't know, I don't get to take naps very often, but a lot of times when I do, I feel worse than I did before. Have you ever had that feeling where the nap makes you feel worse? I think that's the kind of sleep Jesus is drawing our attention to. Stay awake, he says. Don't let yourself go into that deep, deep sleep where you're disoriented when you wake up. You need to be able to know where you are and have a sense of things at any moment. I have noticed that some people have handled coronavirus a little more easily than others. And there are probably a lot of factors that go into that. For some people, it's because they've always loved history. And they already knew all about the Spanish flu. They were so interested in that. And they said, do you realize that that lasted for 18 months and all these things happened and this was the rate at this time? They already knew that it's going to be a long haul. And so because they knew history, they knew that there was going to be a lot in store for us. Other people, it's because they are very in touch with being human They're in touch with their weaknesses. For other people, it's because they've practiced their faith week in and week out. I have found that many people in our parish have done extremely well because they're people who have been practicing all along. They already have a regular routine of praying in the morning, or they do the rosary sometime during the day. They come to Mass every weekend. They are prepared for God to be their consolation. But there's a group of people who the reason they're able to handle this is because it's not the worst thing they've ever been through. They've already been knocked down by life before. And this is one more challenge. And for many, it's not even the hardest one. One of the things we did early in coronavirus as a parish was we started a podcast called Profiles of Endurance, where we asked parishioners who've been through hard things, teach us how you did it. How did you get through? How did you manage? And there's several people sitting here right now that have participated in that podcast. I found that it's been a real help for me to recognize there are so many hard things that people go through, and they somehow find the way to overcome. One of them was a woman named Nell Stokes, who lives in Queens. Nell is someone who grew up in the civil rights movement as an African-American woman in Montgomery, Alabama. She was 16 years old during that bus boycott. It's a fascinating interview, and I really recommend it. But actually, one of the most important parts for me happened after the recording was done. We were talking about life, and I was thanking her for her participation. And she told me about back in 1972, when her husband left her with no notice, with 6 children. And she said, the day he left was the last day that I cussed. She said, I stopped cussing on June 2nd, 1972. And it's the exact same day I also stopped smoking. I said, really? She said, well, I couldn't do it on the day he left because I needed to cuss him out. She said, but the next day I realized these children are going to need me more than ever. I'm now their mother and their father, so I can't smoke. I don't have that luxury. I have to be healthy. I have to be here to raise them. And then she said, and I can't cuss because they need to be able to look up to me. I need to be noble. I need to be a role model for them. I'm their mother and their father. And so she can name the day, June 2nd, 1972. You see, she wasn't sleeping that soundly. Even though her husband leaving was a complete wake-up call, even though she couldn't have predicted it was going to happen, she wasn't totally asleep. She wasn't totally disoriented because she was expecting to be awoken at any time. And she was expecting that she was going to need God to help her through it. I think that is why it's so important that the first reading had that beautiful image that we heard today about God being the potter and us being the clay. One thing that's a fact about all pottery is that it's already been fired in a kiln. It's already what it's going to be. You can't reshape pottery into something else. It's already fired and glazed. And so I think that image is really important for us because God has created us as we are. That was God's part. It's our job to figure out what we're going to fill ourselves with because all pottery has capacity to be filled. And I'm realizing that another story from Scripture hit me when I was preparing for this week, that one where Jesus was eating with the Pharisees and they turn on him and they say, hey, how come you don't wash the dishes according to our tradition? How come you don't wash your hands according to our rituals before you eat? And Jesus said, because there's nothing wrong with the cup. God made it. It's the inside that's dirty because of what we do. He said, you will focus on the inside. What God made is not impure. It's what we do. Isn't that so true? So I think that is what we're being called to think about today. How are we God's masterpiece? And what do we need to do to be aligned with that? So that if a wake-up call comes, we're ready. we know who we are and we're prepared for what needs to be done. What do you find yourself thinking about right now as we talk about these things? What wake-up calls are on your mind? Are you thinking about a time in your life where you were unprepared for the wake-up call that came? Are you thinking about how easy it is for us to think that bad things only happen to other people? Some people have told me, I never thought that I could get cancer. I thought cancer happened to other people. I didn't think divorce could happen in our family. I thought divorce happened in other families. I thought tragedies happened elsewhere. Is there any chance that there's a way for us to become more alert through our spiritual practice, more aware that God can get us through anything? Have you had any challenges that you've not been up to facing that you want to handle in a new way now? Is there some mistake that you need to fix or some relationship that needs your attention? Have you been procrastinating about something, but it's time to act? The way that Nell realized that June 2nd, 1972 was the day she had to quit smoking and she had to quit cussing because there were no more choices. I think that's why the psalm is so beautiful today for us. Lord, make us turn to you. Make us. Get our attention. Show us your face, however you have to. And help us to remember that what you've made is beautiful and tough. It's made for capacity. It can handle a lot. Help us to focus on what we do with what's been served to each of us.